In this episode, we're going to move from poisoning the data to poisoning the model itself, which is a different problem with its own clues and risks. Data poisoning is about contaminating what the model learns from, so the model develops harmful patterns over time. Model poisoning is about corrupting the model artifacts or the model supply chain so that what you deploy is not the model you think it is. For beginners, it can help to think of a model artifact as the packaged brain of the system, the file or bundle that gets loaded into a service to generate outputs. If that artifact is tampered with, the system can behave maliciously even if your training data was clean. This is similar to the difference between a cookbook being altered slowly by adding bad recipes over time versus someone swapping the entire cookbook with a counterfeit that looks similar but contains hidden traps. Model poisoning can be targeted, stealthy, and high impact because it sits closer to deployment, where it can affect production quickly. Investigating model poisoning therefore focuses on artifact integrity, the supply chain paths that move the model from creation to deployment, and remediation steps that restore trust in what is running. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good beginner definition is that model poisoning is an integrity compromise of the model weights, the configuration, or associated components that determine behavior. This could happen during training, during storage, during packaging, during transfer, or during deployment. The attacker's goal might be to embed a backdoor trigger, degrade performance, cause specific misclassifications, or create a covert leakage path. The attacker could be an external adversary who gained access to your systems, or it could be a compromise in a third-party component you rely on, like a pre-trained model you downloaded. Beginners sometimes imagine that models are mysterious and therefore impossible to tamper with. But in practice, models are digital artifacts like any other, and digital artifacts can be modified. If you can swap a software library with a Trojanized version, you can also swap a model file with a Trojanized version. The key security principle is that you should treat model artifacts like software releases. They need provenance, signing, and integrity checks. Without those, you cannot reliably claim that the model you trained is the model you deployed. Detection clues for model poisoning often show up as unexpected behavior that does not match what you saw in evaluation, especially if the change is sudden. If a model that was stable yesterday starts producing strange outputs today without a corresponding data or code change, that is an integrity smell. Another clue is the presence of triggers, where the model behaves normally most of the time, but fails or reveals odd behavior when a specific phrase, pattern, or input structure appears. In a classification setting, this might look like a certain input always being misclassified in a consistent way. In a generative setting, it could look like the model suddenly revealing sensitive internal instructions or producing a consistent malicious response when a certain rare word appears. Another clue is mismatch between the deployed model and the expected model version, such as the system reporting one version but behaving like another. For beginners, the key idea is that poisoning is often designed to be quiet and to activate only under special conditions. So unusual conditional behavior is more suspicious than broad obvious breakage. There are also environmental clues that suggest artifact tampering. For example, if integrity checks fail, if file hashes differ from the expected values, or if there are unexplained changes to storage buckets or model registries, those are strong signals. If access logs show that someone or something modified the model artifact outside the normal release pipeline, that is another key clue. If deployment systems pulled a model artifact from an unexpected location or over an unusual connection, that could indicate supply chain interference. Beginners should think of this as the story of the artifact's journey, where it lived, who touched it, and how it moved. If any step in that journey is unaccounted for, the risk increases. This is why artifact integrity is central. You want cryptographic or otherwise strong evidence that the artifact you have is exactly the artifact that was approved. Without that evidence, you are relying on hope and informal process, which is not a dependable security strategy. Supply chain is the set of paths and dependencies that bring a model into production. In modern AI, supply chain can include your own training code, your own data pipeline, third-party pre-trained models, libraries for training and inference, build systems that package artifacts, storage systems that host them, and deployment systems that deliver them. Any weak link can become an entry point. One common supply chain risk is downloading a model from an untrusted source or a mirror that is not authenticated. Another is relying on a compromised build system, where artifacts are altered during packaging. Another is insufficient access control on the model registry, where an attacker can replace an artifact while keeping the name and version similar enough to avoid notice. Beginners should notice how similar this is to software supply chain attacks. The attacker aims to insert a malicious component into a trusted channel so defenders deploy it themselves. With models, the same logic applies, but the effects can be subtle because model behavior is probabilistic and harder to test exhaustively. That makes strong provenance and reproducibility even more important. When investigating suspected model poisoning, the first step is containment that prevents further spread and preserves evidence. That might mean pausing deployments, freezing the model registry, and isolating the current production artifacts so they cannot be overwritten. It can also mean routing traffic away from the suspected model or falling back to a known good prior model version if one exists. For beginners, containment is about stopping new risk while you learn. Next, you want to verify the deployed artifact against a known good baseline. That includes checking hashes, signatures, and metadata, and confirming that the artifact came through the approved pipeline. You also want to inspect access logs around the time the model changed, looking for unexpected modifications, unusual accounts, or abnormal access patterns. In parallel, you want to reproduce the suspicious behavior using controlled tests to confirm it is consistent. If it is consistent, you can search for triggers, but you should do so carefully, because testing can expose you to harmful outputs. The goal is to gather evidence that distinguishes a poisoned artifact from normal variability or from a benign configuration mistake. Impact analysis for model poisoning focuses on what the compromised model could have done and who might have been affected. If the model had access to sensitive data and context, you need to consider whether it could have leaked that data through outputs. If the model could call tools or trigger actions, you need to consider whether it could have performed unauthorized actions. If the model is used in security detection, you need to consider whether it could have missed real threats or generated noise that blinded analysts. Impact analysis also considers how long the poison model was in use, how much traffic it processed, and whether certain triggers might have been activated by real users. Beginners should understand that you do not need to prove every harmful output occurred to treat this seriously. If the model was compromised, you assume its outputs are untrusted for the affected period. You also want to identify all places where the artifact was deployed, including staging environments, edge deployments, and any backups or replicas. A poison model can persist in multiple copies, so scope identification is critical. This is why asset inventory and deployment tracking matter in AI security. Remediation starts with restoring a trustworthy model into production. The safest first move is often to roll back to a known good artifact that has verified provenance, while keeping the compromised artifact preserved for forensics. Rolling back buys time and reduces ongoing harm. However, rollback is not the end, because you also need to close the supply chain gap that allowed tampering. That may include tightening access control to the model registry, requiring signed artifacts, enforcing signature verification during deployment, and ensuring that build pipelines are hardened and monitored. It may also include changing credentials, rotating keys, and reviewing permissions, because artifact tampering often indicates broader compromise. If the poisoning involved a third-party model, remediation may require switching sources, validating provider integrity, and updating vendor risk practices. For beginners, a key lesson is that remediation is both technical and procedural. You fix the system and the process that let the bad artifact through. Otherwise, you are likely to face the same incident again. Another part of remediation is strengthening validation so future poisoning is detected earlier. That includes automated tests that compare model behavior to expected baselines, particularly on high-risk prompts and known trigger patterns. It can include canary testing, where a new model is exposed to limited traffic and monitored closely before full rollout. It can include continuous monitoring for drift that is inconsistent with expected changes. It can also include reproducibility practices, where you can rebuild a model from known inputs and confirm the resulting artifact matches what you intend to deploy. Beginners do not need to implement reproducibility details, but they should understand the reason. If you cannot reproduce your own artifact, it is harder to prove it was not replaced. Provenance is about tracing where something came from, and reproducibility is about being able to make it again and compare. Together, they give you confidence that your deployed model is authentic. A common beginner misconception is that model poisoning is just a rare theoretical risk. In reality, as AI systems become more common and more connected to sensitive workflows, attackers have more incentive to target their supply chains. Another misconception is that evaluating model accuracy is enough to detect poisoning. Accuracy tests can miss backdoors designed to activate under rare conditions, and they can miss subtle behaviors that only show up in certain contexts. That is why integrity checks are essential. They do not depend on catching every behavioral symptom. Another misconception is that if a model is hosted by a trusted provider, you do not need to worry about supply chain. Trusted providers reduce risk, but they do not eliminate it, and you still need controls like identity management, configuration governance, and monitoring. Beginners should take away that model artifacts deserve the same seriousness as software binaries. If you would not deploy and sign code from an unverified source, you should not deploy an unverified model artifact either. To close, investigating model poisoning centers on artifact integrity, supply chain awareness, and disciplined remediation. Detection clues include sudden unexplained behavioral changes, conditional trigger-based oddities, and mismatches between expected and deployed versions. Investigation involves containment, verifying hashes and provenance, reviewing access and deployment logs, and reproducing suspicious behaviors under controlled conditions. Impact analysis looks at how long the compromised model was used, what data and actions it could access, and which users and systems might have been affected. Remediation includes rolling back to known good artifacts, hardening the model registry and build pipeline, enforcing signed artifacts and verification at deployment, and strengthening monitoring and validation to catch future tampering early. The beginner mindset is straightforward. Treat model artifacts as critical supply chain components, because if the artifact is not authentic, the system's behavior cannot be trusted no matter how good the design looked on paper.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.